The October rain fell like judgment across the Georgia clay, each drop hammering the windshield of Eva Hartwell's 15-year-old sedan as it crawled through mud the color of old blood. The wipers carved arcs of clarity that vanished almost instantly, revealing only more desolation mailboxes tilting at angles that suggested surrender trailers with blue tarps stretched across leaking roofs, puddles swallowing what remained of the gravel road. Eva's fingers gripped the steering wheel hard enough to make her knuckles white. On her left hand, the wedding ring caught what little light filtered through the storm clouds. Gold band, simple, the only thing she hadn't pawned in the 8 months since Nathaniel died pulling the Thompson family from their burning apartment building. The morgue had returned it to her in a plastic bag. With his other effects, the metal still warm somehow, and she'd slipped it back on her finger like a promise she wasn't ready to break. In the rearview mirror, Rosemary's face floated like a small moon. 6 years old, dark curls plastered to her forehead from the humidity, her wheelchair secured beside her in the back seat with bungee cords Eva had bought at a dollar store. The chair's wheels pressed against the window, leaving smudges that looked like reaching fingers. The dashboard clock read 4:47. The day's light was already dying, strangled by clouds that seemed to press down from a sky the color of slate. Eva's purse sat on the passenger seat, its zipper broken, the flap held shut by a safety pin. Inside, an envelope contained $300 in worn bills, 20s, mostly a few 10s, 5 crumpled ones. She'd saved it by skipping meals, by diluting Rosie's apple juice until it ran almost clear, by washing their clothes in the sink of the motel where they'd spent the last 3 weeks using hand soap that left everything stiff and smelling faintly chemical. The motel manager had finally shut off their room's electricity yesterday morning, said they were 2 weeks past due. Said he had a business to run, said he was sorry but not sorry enough to make a difference. $300. The exact amount Silas Thornton had quoted over the phone for first month's rent on Trailer 17 at Willowbrook Mobile Home Park. Cash in advance, no refunds, take it as is. Eva had agreed without seeing it, without asking questions, because questions required options, and she had none left. The sign emerged from the mist like something half-drowned. Willowbrook Mobile Home Park. The letters faded to ghosts of themselves, listing slightly to the left on posts that had given up trying to stand straight. Below it, painted in what might have once been red but had weathered to rust brown, someone had added another line, "Last stop before nowhere." Someone else had tried to cover it with white paint, but the pessimistic proclamation bled through like a confession that refused to stay buried. Eva eased the sedan onto what passed for a parking area, her tires sinking into mud that seemed to have intentions of its own. The park stretched before her in the gathering dusk, a dozen trailers in various states of decay scattered across a clearing that backed up against dense Georgia pine forest. Most had lights glowing in windows yellow and warm against the gray afternoon. A few sat dark windows boarded or covered with plastic sheeting that billowed like lungs breathing. From the back seat, Rosie's voice carried that particular quality of patience children develop when they've asked the same question too many times and know better than to expect a real answer. "Are we there yet?" Mama Eva met her daughter's eyes in the mirror. Nate's eyes, that same deep brown that could look black in certain light, that same capacity for hope, even when hope seemed ridiculous. Almost sweetheart. Just a little bit further now. The lie tasted familiar. She'd been telling variations of it for months. A little bit further. A little bit longer. Things will get better soon. The kind of promises desperate mothers make to daughters too young to understand, that sometimes there is no further to go, that sometimes you reach the edge and the only question left is whether you jump or stand still and wait for the ground to crumble beneath your feet. The office was a single-wide trailer with an American flag hanging from a pole on the tiny porch, the fabric so saturated with rain it drooped like something exhausted. A hand-painted sign in the window announced, "Office," in bold red letters. The paint dripped at the bottom of each stroke, as if whoever made it had applied it too thick, too fast, too desperate to be finished. Eva killed the engine. The sudden silence felt heavy, broken only by the rain's percussion on the car's metal roof. "Stay here, sweetheart. I'll check in with Mr. Thornton first, then come get you." "Okay." Rosie nodded, already pulling her journal from the bag at her feet. It was leather-bound, a gift from Nate on their last anniversary back when anniversaries felt like celebrations instead of archaeology. The pages were filled with Rosie's careful printing stories about princesses and dragons, drawings of families that always included a father who looked like Nate, tall and smiling forever, frozen in the moment before he ran back into the burning building one last time. Eva pushed open the car door and immediately regretted it. The rain hit her like a physical thing, cold and mean, soaking through her jacket in seconds. She ran the 15 feet to the office porch, her sneakers making wet, squelching sounds that reminded her of wounds. The door swung open before she could knock. A man stood there, backlit by the orange glow of a space heater, his silhouette tall and angular. A cap sat low on his head, the brim shadowing his eyes. As Eva stepped inside, shaking water from her hair, she saw the cap's embroidered text, Korea, 1952, with a faded image of the peninsula beneath. "You must be Hartwell." The voice was gravel, shifted by decades, worn smooth in some places, sharp in others. The teacher. Former teacher. Eva's correction came automatically, a reflex she hadn't managed to kill yet. "I'm here about Trailer 17. We spoke on the phone." Silas Thornton nodded slowly, gesturing toward a metal folding chair across from a desk that looked like it had survived several wars of its own. He was old, maybe 70, maybe more, with a face that seemed constructed from leather and determination. His eyes were pale blue, the kind of blue that comes from staring at too much sky for too many years, and they studied Eva with the sort of attention that made her want to check her reflection for whatever he was seeing. She sat. The space heater glowed at Silas's feet, fighting the damp chill that seemed to seep through the trailer's thin walls. On the desk, a ledger lay open, filled with columns of numbers in cramped handwriting. A coffee mug sat beside it, steam rising in lazy spirals, smelling of something bitter and overbrewed. "Number 17. Silas's finger traced a line in the ledger. "Furthest one back where the property meets the woods." He paused, his pale eyes lifting to meet hers. "You sure about this? Miss Hartwell place hasn't been lived in for 2 years. Last tenant left in a hurry." Eva felt something cold settle in her stomach that had nothing to do with the rain or the inadequate heater. "I'm sure. You said 300 cash in advance." "That I did." Silas leaned back in his chair, the springs creaking protest. "No refunds, though. No complaints either. You take it as his problems and all. What happened to the last tenant?" The question hung in the air between them. Silas scratched at his jaw where white stubble grew in patches like winter grass. "James Parker. Iraq vet, 2 tours. Came back different like a lot of boys do. He came here looking for quiet, for space to put himself back together. Started saying he heard voices from under the floor. The chill in Eva's stomach spread outward. Voices singing sometimes, crying other times. Silas shrugged, but the gesture felt rehearsed, like he'd told this story before and settled on this particular way of not quite telling it. Found him one morning, sitting in his truck at 3 in the morning, everything he owned packed up. Said he wasn't going back inside that trailer for anything in the world, not even to collect his security deposit. Eva thought about the $300 in her purse, about Rosie waiting in the car, about the motel room with no electricity, and the notice from Rosie's doctor that her medication refills required payment up front now that their insurance had lapsed. "What do you think it was?" The voices. Silas pulled a key from his desk drawer, metal scraping against wood. Probably just the wind in the pipes. Old place like that makes all kinds of noise, settles and shifts. He slid the key across the desk toward her. "But if you're the superstitious type, might want to think twice." Eva picked up the key. It felt heavier than it should, cold against her palm. "I'm not superstitious, Mr. Thornton. I'm desperate. There's a difference." Something shifted in Silas's expression, a softening around the eyes that might have been respect or might have been pity. He stood, moving to the small window that looked out over the trailer park. "That little girl of yours, the one I saw in the car. The wheelchair? Trailer's not set up for that. You'll need a ramp. I'll manage. There's some old pallets behind the maintenance shed. Might help." He turned back to face her, and for a moment Eva saw something in his face that looked like memory, like pain still fresh, despite decades of trying to bury it. And Miss Hartwell. My granddaddy worked this land a long time ago before it was a trailer park. Strange history here. Old history. What kind of history? The kind that doesn't stay buried as well as folks hope. Silas returned to his desk, sat down, closed the ledger with a sound like a door shutting. Most folks around here mind their own business. But if you need help, you holler. Eva stood pocketing the key. Thank you. She stepped back into the rain, which had softened to a steady drizzle that felt like resignation. The car sat where she'd left it. Rosie's small face visible through the fogged window, still bent over her journal. Eva opened the door and slid into the driver's seat, water dripping from her hair onto the cracked vinyl. Did we get it, Mama? Do we have a home again? The question landed like a stone in Eva's chest. Home. Their apartment with the bay window where morning light turned everything gold had been home. The house before that, with Nate's workshop in the garage, and the vegetable garden Rosie had helped plant, had been home. This place with its mud and decay, and a trailer where the last tenant fled from voices in the night, this was survival, not home. But survival was all Eva had left to offer. Yes, baby, we have a place to stay. She started the car and drove slowly toward the far end of the park, headlights cutting tunnels through the drizzle. Trailer 17 emerged from the gloom like something excavated from a past that should have stayed buried. A 1976 Skyline single-wide, the paint faded to a color that might have once been cream, but had weathered to something closer to bone. One end rested on cinder blocks, the other on wooden beams so dark with rot they looked like they'd been pulled from a shipwreck. Metal siding showed patches of rust that spread like disease, and at least 2 windows had been covered with plywood that had itself begun to warp and split. But it had a roof. It had walls. It was shelter. It was all they could afford. Eva parked as close as possible and turned to face Rosie, who had stopped writing and was staring at their new home with an expression Eva couldn't quite read. I'm going to check inside first, make sure it's safe. Then I'll come back for you. Okay. Rosie nodded, her small hands gripping her journal like an anchor. Be careful of monsters, Mama. Always am, sweetheart. The key stuck in the lock, requiring the kind of forceful jiggling that suggested long disuse. The door finally gave with a groan that sounded almost animal, swinging inward on hinges that screamed for oil. The smell hit Eva before she crossed the threshold. Mildew thick enough to taste dust that suggested years rather than months, and underneath it all something earthier, like the scent of a basement after heavy rain, dank and old and wrong somehow. Eva found the light switch by touch, expecting nothing, and was surprised when the overhead fixture flickered to life. The bulb was dim, casting shadows that seemed to lean toward her, but it worked. That felt like a small miracle in a day devoid of them. The main room held the wreckage of hasty departure. A sagging couch against one wall, its fabric stained with patterns that might have been water damage or might have been something else. A coffee table on its side as if knocked over in a rush. Papers scattered across the floor. Newspapers, notebooks, documents that fluttered in the breeze from the open door, like things trying to escape. Eva stepped further inside, her feet finding soft spots in the floor that made her stomach tighten. The linoleum in the kitchenette was cracked and lifting at the edges, revealing plywood beneath that had gone dark with moisture. But the appliances were intact, a refrigerator that hummed to life when she plugged it in, a stove with 2 burners that still worked when she tested them, a sink with a faucet that groaned and sputtered but eventually produced water the color of weak tea. A short hallway led to 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. The larger bedroom held a bare mattress on a metal frame. More scattered papers, a closet door hanging open to reveal wire hangers swaying like skeletal fingers. The smaller bedroom would be Rosie's, closer to the bathroom, which mattered with the wheelchair, and smaller meant easier to heat once winter came, and Eva had to choose which rooms deserved warmth. But it was the floor in Rosie's room that made Eva stop. The carpet was threadbare, stained, and in places it had pulled away from the walls entirely. But more than that, it felt wrong beneath her feet. Not just soft, but yielding, like walking on something that wanted to give way. Eva knelt, pressing her hand against one particularly suspicious spot. The carpet compressed too easily, and beneath it she felt movement, a shifting that spoke of rot and structural failure. This would need to be fixed before Rosie could use this room safely. But fixing things required money they didn't have, skills Eva wasn't sure she possessed, and time that felt like a luxury when every day brought new crises. She stood brushing dust from her knees and noticed the notebooks scattered in this room too. More than scattered, deliberately placed, as if James Parker had been using them, studying them before whatever happened that made him flee in the middle of the night. Eva picked up the nearest one, a composition book with water-stained cardboard covers. On the front, in precise block letters, someone had written, "Sound Night Log." Eva flipped it open. Dated entries filled the pages, timestamps precise to the minute. March 3rd, 2:17 a.m. Singing again. Low voices like a hymn. Checked outside, nothing. Sound definitely coming from below. March 5th, 10:03 a.m. Children crying. Recorded on phone but playback just static. Am I losing it? March 8th, 3:22 a.m. Voices clearer tonight. Woman's voice saying, "Hush now," and "this way." Made diagram of where sound strongest, see attached. Eva turned the page and found a crude floor plan, clearly this trailer, with X marks in several locations. The largest concentration of marks clustered in the small bedroom where she stood now. A chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the damp air seeping through the walls. James Parker hadn't been crazy or haunted. He'd been methodical, documenting something he couldn't explain but was trying desperately to understand. These weren't the ravings of someone losing touch with reality. They were the careful notes of a man trained by the military to observe, record, analyze. Eva gathered more notebooks, finding them tucked in corners under the sagging couch behind the refrigerator. Each one contained variations on the same theme, sounds from below, voices singing and crying and whispering, all clustered in specific locations that formed a pattern Eva's historian training recognized even before her conscious mind caught up. These weren't random. They were deliberate, organized, intentional. In the final notebook, labeled simply "Below," Eva found something that made her hands start to shake. April 17th. Found historical records at library. This land was once part of Fairmont Plantation. Colonel Joshua Fairmont, one of Georgia's wealthiest slaveholders. Over 250 enslaved people before Sherman's march. Coincidence, April 22nd. Floor getting softer in small bedroom. Something underneath. Not dirt, not the trailer undercarriage. Something else. Something built. April 25th. Dreamed of people running through darkness. Lanterns, whispers. Woke up to sounds of chains rattling. 2:44 a.m. Can't stay here much longer. Eva's pulse hammered in her throat. Fairmont Plantation. She knew that name from her teaching days, from the sections on antebellum Georgia that students found either fascinating or unbearable, depending on their capacity to confront history's ugliness. Colonel Joshua Fairmont had been notorious not just for the scale of his operation, but for his vocal, vicious defense of slavery as God's ordained hierarchy, his public arguments against abolition, his reputation for cruelty that was extreme even by the standards of men who bought and sold human beings. Could this trailer park really sit on what had been Fairmont land? Could these sounds James Parker documented be something more than wind and settling wood? A sharp crack interrupted her thoughts. Eva's hand, pressing against the soft spot in the floor while she read, had broken through the surface. Not just carpet giving way, the plywood subfloor beneath had crumbled like wet cardboard, revealing darkness below. Eva jerked her hand back, her heart slamming against her ribs. She fumbled for her phone, activated the flashlight, and directed it into the hole. The beam disappeared into space much deeper than any normal crawl space should be. She could see edges where the wood had been cut deliberately, precisely. Not rot creating this opening. Someone had made it, then covered it over. Mama Rosie's voice carried from outside, muffled by walls and rain. What was that? What was the noise? Nothing, baby. Just some old floor. Stay there. Eva pulled away more of the rotted wood, her movements frantic now, driven by something she couldn't name. Adrenaline maybe, or historian's instinct, or the desperate need to understand what had driven a combat veteran to flee this place at 3 in the morning with everything he owned. Within minutes she'd exposed a 3-foot square opening. Metal hinges still clung to one edge, corroded but unmistakable. A trapdoor, and below it, revealed by her phone's light, wooden steps descended into darkness that felt less like absence and more like presence, like something waiting. Eva's rational mind screamed warnings. She should call someone, the authorities, a building inspector, anyone qualified to determine what lay beneath this trailer and whether it was dangerous. But her rational mind had been overruled by circumstances 8 months ago when Nate died, and the insurance company found a clause that reduced their payout to almost nothing when the school district eliminated her position in budget cuts, when Rosie's medication costs exceeded what any rational person could afford without insurance. Rational had stopped being relevant somewhere around the time Eva started diluting apple juice and washing clothes in motel sinks. She called out to Rosie again. "I need you to stay in the living room for a bit longer, sweetheart. I found something I need to check." "What did you find?" "I'm not sure yet. Just give Mama a few minutes, okay?" The first step creaked but held her weight. Eva descended slowly, phone light casting wild shadows on walls she couldn't yet see clearly. 7 steps total each, taking her further from the present day and deeper into something that felt like history made tangible, like time itself had a texture you could touch. The chamber at the bottom was roughly 8 feet square. The walls were brick, handmade from the look of them, irregular, slightly misshapen, the kind that dated to before the Civil War, when each brick was formed by hand rather than machine. The mortar between them had held remarkably well, suggesting craftsmanship and care in construction. The floor was hard-packed dirt, and the ceiling just high enough that Eva had to duck only slightly. But it was what lined the walls that made her breath catch in her throat. Shelves had been built into the brick, not crude planks, but carefully constructed storage, each shelf slightly different in size, as if designed for specific purposes. Most were empty now, dust-coated and bare, but some still held objects that had somehow survived the decades. Metal boxes spotted with rust, glass bottles with faded paper labels, the writing too degraded to read, ceramic containers sealed with what looked like wax, and in one corner, wrapped in material that might have been oilcloth, several bundles the size of books. Eva approached the largest bundle with hands that trembled. The oilcloth cracked at her touch, brittle with age, but it had done its job. Protected from moisture by the brick construction, sealed against air by the tight wrapping, the contents had survived in condition that seemed almost miraculous. Inside the oilcloth lay a leather portfolio, the kind that might have held important documents in an era before filing cabinets and digital storage. Eva opened it carefully, aware she might be damaging something irreplaceable but unable to stop herself. The first page bore a date in faded ink, April 12, 1863. Her historian's training took over the part of her brain that could assess documents for authenticity, that understood paper quality and ink oxidation and handwriting styles. This was real. Not a reproduction, not a forgery. Real documents from 1863 hidden in a chamber beneath what was now a trailer park in rural Georgia. The first item was a map hand-drawn with the kind of meticulous detail that spoke of someone's life depending on accuracy. It showed the local area with place names Eva didn't recognize, crossroads and creek beds and farmsteads long since erased by time. But one name jumped out, written in larger letters and circled Fairmont Plantation. From it, lines led north, each marked with symbols Eva would have dismissed as decorative if not for James Parker's research. She knew these symbols now had taught them to students who found the Underground Railroad either inspiring or too painful to discuss. Quilting patterns that meant safe house, marks that indicated routes, codes that promised freedom or warned of danger. The second document made Eva's knees give out. She sank to the dirt floor, leather portfolio open on her lap, phone light revealing words that seemed to burn off the page. "My dearest Martha." The terminal beneath the Fairmont house remained secure despite increased patrols. 23 souls passed through last month bound for the northern lines. 11 men, 7 women, 5 children. The youngest just turned 4 years. The new overseer suspects nothing. though we must remain vigilant. The codes have changed again. 3 knocks, pause. 2 knocks, pause. 1 knock. The response must be, the river flows north when the moon is dark. I pray this war ends soon so we might live without these necessary deceptions. How much longer must we pretend loyalty to a cause we abhor while risking our lives for the truth we hold dear? Your devoted brother Thomas. Eva read it 3 times, her mind struggling to process what her eyes were showing her. A terminal, the Underground Railroad. Here, beneath what was now a rusted trailer in a forgotten corner of Georgia, people had risked everything to ferry enslaved people to freedom. The chamber wasn't just an historical curiosity. It was a station on the network that had saved thousands, maybe tens of thousands of lives. Her phone's light wavered as her hands shook. She set it down, positioning it to illuminate the portfolio, and continued examining the contents. More documents revealed themselves as she carefully unwrapped the remaining bundles. Lists of names: Moses, Ruth, Samuel, Mary, Elijah, Grace, with dates beside them, and destinations that read like promises: Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Canada. Some entries had small crosses marked next to them, and Eva's heart clenched as she realized these must indicate those who hadn't made it, who'd been caught or died trying to reach freedom. One ledger contained detailed records that made the history vivid and terrible and human in ways textbooks never managed. June 3, 1863. Solomon and family wife Ruth, children aged 4 and 7, arrived in poor health. Ruth's feet badly injured from walking barefoot for 3 days. Treated with tincture and wrapped. Hid here 6 days until patrol passed. Successfully moved to Thompson Station under cover of supply wagon. May God protect them. June 19, 1863. Mary and infant son arrived. Baby coughing badly, dangerous to move. Catherine visited under pretense of inspecting quarters. Brought medicine hidden in sewing basket. Both recovered after 2 weeks. Moved north with Quaker family posing as servants. Catherine. Eva's pulse jumped. Catherine Fairmont. The plantation owner's wife had been part of the Underground Railroad. She'd risked not just her social standing but her life. And she'd done it while living under the same roof as one of Georgia's most notorious defenders of slavery. Among the papers, Eva found a small leather-bound journal different from the others. The handwriting was more feminine, more hurried, as if written in stolen moments when discovery would mean death. I cannot reconcile the man I married with the cause he serves. Joshua speaks of property rights and states' sovereignty while human beings suffer in our fields. When this war ends, and pray God it ends with freedom for all, I will confess my activities. Until then, this chamber serves God's work, not man's law. It was signed simply C.F. Another entry several pages later made Eva's vision blur with tears. Tonight, a girl no older than 10 arrived alone. She had walked from the Harrison plantation 20 miles through swamp and forest. Her back bore fresh whip marks. As I treated her wounds, she sang softly a song her mother had taught her, the same lullaby I sing to my own children. How can Joshua not see? How can any of them not see? We are all God's children. Eva sat in the dirt of that chamber, surrounded by evidence of courage that defied comprehension, and felt something shift inside her. 8 months of grief and fear and slow-motion drowning suddenly seemed less like an ending and more like preparation. She'd been a teacher trained to make history live for students who found it distant and abstract. Now history had reached up from beneath a rotted floor and demanded she become its guardian. From above, Rosie's voice carried down the steps. "Mama, you've been gone forever. Are you okay?" Eva carefully returned the documents to their wrappers, her hands moving with the reverence reserved for sacred objects. "I'm coming, sweetheart. I found something. Something important." She climbed the worn steps with care, emerging back into the small bedroom where fluorescent light and water-stained walls seemed impossibly mundane after what she'd just witnessed. Rosie had maneuvered her wheelchair to the edge of the opening, her face alive with the kind of curiosity that made Eva's chest ache, because it was so purely Nate's expression, that hunger to understand the world that had made him run into fires to save people he'd never met, like in the movies. Secret passages and everything. better than the movies. Rosie, this is real history, real people who helped other people find freedom. Can I see? Eva hesitated. The steps were steep, too steep for a wheelchair, too narrow, even if they could somehow navigate Rosie down them. Soon, baby. First, we need to make it safe, and we need to tell the right people so it's protected. Rosie nodded with the solemnity children develop when they understand something matters, even if they don't fully grasp why. It's important, isn't it? Like Daddy used to say, we have to remember history so we don't repeat the bad parts. That's exactly right. Eva kissed her daughter's forehead, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, cheap dollar store brand that smelled like artificial flowers but meant Rosie was clean and cared for and loved. You're so smart, just like your father. That night, while rain drummed a steady rhythm on the trailer's metal roof, Eva worked by the dim overhead light to transform chaos into something approaching livable. She'd covered the entrance to the chamber with a piece of plywood she'd found leaning against the trailer's exterior, then positioned Rosie's small area rug over it. Not hidden exactly, but not immediately visible either. Some instinct told her to be careful about who knew what lay beneath their floor until she understood the implications better. She'd brought in their meager possessions from the car, 2 suitcases of clothes, a box of Rosie's books and toys, Eva's teaching materials she couldn't bear to abandon even when selling them might have bought another week at the motel. She'd set up Rosie's bed in the living room using couch cushions and every blanket they owned to create something soft enough for her daughter to sleep on. The small bedroom with its rotted floor and hidden chamber would wait until Eva figured out what came next. Rosie had fallen asleep quickly, exhausted by the day's upheaval, her journal still clutched in one hand. Eva stood watching her daughter breathe the rise and fall of her small chest, and felt the weight of $300 spent settle over her like a pronouncement. This was it. No reserve funds, no backup plan, no margin for error. They were committed now to this place, this trailer with its soft floors and hidden history, and a chamber full of documents that might be priceless or might be worthless, depending on whether anyone cared about the courage of people who'd been dead for over a century and a half. In one corner she found a child's doll roughly carved from wood, the features worn smooth by small hands that had clutched it during terrified nights waiting for freedom. On a shelf, a Bible with margin notes in multiple handwritings, verses underlined, prayers scribbled in cramped script dates that corresponded to some of the ledger entries. Medicine bottles with labels faded to illegibility. Crude surgical tools for treating wounds and illness in secret without access to doctors who might ask questions. Behind one shelf, Eva discovered a loose brick. Inside the cavity was a small leather pouch. Her hands trembled as she opened it, revealing a collection of coins, gold and silver, some minted in the 1850s, others older. A folded note tucked among them read in Catherine Fairmont's distinctive hand, "For the journey north. May God speed you to freedom. C.F." The coins were worth a fortune now, not just in monetary terms but historically. Each one represented hope translated into metal, the price of freedom measured in eagles and half-dollars. Catherine Fairmont had hidden escape funds for the fugitives' insurance against the unexpected proof of commitment that went beyond ideology into material sacrifice. When Eva returned to the trailer, she realized she'd been crying. The weight of history, the courage of those who'd passed through this chamber, the desperation of families torn apart by an evil system that had tried to reduce human beings to property, it crashed over her like a wave. She sat on the sagging couch beside where Rosie slept and let the tears come silent so as not to wake her daughter until her chest ached and her eyes burned. But mixed with the sorrow was something else. Hope. The same hope that had driven enslaved people to risk death for a chance at freedom. The same hope that had motivated Catherine Fairmont to betray her husband, her class, her entire social world. The same hope that had kept this secret safe for over 150 years, waiting for exactly the right moment to surface. Eva looked at Rosie sleeping peacefully, her wheelchair folded beside the makeshift bed, her journal lying open to a page where she'd written in careful letters, "Things I miss about Daddy." They'd lost so much. Nate, their home, their stability, their future as they'd imagined it. But here in this run-down trailer above a piece of American history that deserved to be honored, They'd found something that felt like purpose. Tomorrow she would call Dr. Margaret Aldridge, her old history professor at the State University. Tomorrow she would begin the careful process of revealing this discovery to people who could help protect it. Tomorrow she would start fighting to preserve this site and share its stories with a world that needed to remember. But tonight, Eva sat in a rusted trailer and felt the presence of all who'd come before, the freedom seekers, the secret helpers, the brave souls who'd risked everything for justice. Their voices seemed to carry on the Georgia wind that rattled the trailer's thin walls, seeping up through the floorboards, whispering a truth she was only beginning to understand. Sometimes the greatest treasures hide in the most unexpected places, waiting for the right person to find them. The chamber below held more than artifacts. It held proof that ordinary people could do extraordinary things, that courage came in many forms, that hope could survive even the darkest chapters of history. And for a struggling widow who'd spent her last $300 on a chance at shelter, it held something more valuable than any of the gold coins hidden in Catherine Fairmont's leather pouch. It held salvation, not just financial, though that might come, but spiritual, the kind that comes from discovering you've been chosen by history itself to be the guardian of stories that deserve to be told, the voice for those who'd been silenced. The rain continued to fall, drumming its ancient rhythm on metal that was already beginning to feel less like a stranger's roof and more like shelter. Eva pulled a blanket around her shoulders and listened to Rosie breathe, to the wind in the pines beyond the trailer park, to the settling creaks of old wood and older secrets. She thought about James Parker, the combat veteran who'd fled this place because he'd heard voices he couldn't explain. She understood now. Not ghosts, not madness, but history, refusing to stay quiet. The chamber below had acoustic properties that carried sound in strange ways, turning rain and wind into whispers that sounded like singing, like crying, like voices saying, "Hush now, and this way, come this way to freedom." Or maybe it wasn't acoustics at all. Maybe some places hold memory so strong it bleeds through time, making itself heard to those willing to listen. Eva rose and checked the doors, made sure the windows were locked as best they could be given their condition. She adjusted Rosie's blankets, kissed her daughter's forehead one more time. Then she stood at the small window that looked out over Willowbrook Mobile Home Park, over the dark pines beyond, over land that had witnessed unspeakable cruelty and unbelievable courage. Tomorrow would bring challenges she could barely imagine. But tonight, in this last stop before nowhere, Eva Hartwell had found something worth fighting for. She'd bought more than shelter with her last $300. She'd purchased a mission, a purpose, a connection to a past that demanded she honor it with her future. She returned to the couch, pulled the blanket tight, and closed her eyes. Tomorrow the real work would begin. Tomorrow she would call Dr. Aldridge and set in motion events she couldn't control. Tomorrow the world would learn what lay beneath Trailer 17. But tonight belonged to Catherine Fairmont and the 247 souls she'd helped to freedom. Tonight belonged to the child who'd sung her mother's lullaby while Catherine treated whip marks. Tonight belonged to Thomas, who'd written letters about rivers flowing north and codes that meant safety. Tonight belonged to courage, and Eva Hartwell, former teacher, widowed, desperate mother, was determined to prove herself worthy of the trust history had placed in her hands. Morning arrived with the kind of pale light that suggested the storm had exhausted itself overnight, but left the world waterlogged and uncertain. Eva woke on the couch with her neck cramped from the angle she'd slept at, Rosie still breathing steadily in her nest of cushions and blankets. The plywood covering the chamber entrance sat exactly where Eva had left it, innocent and unremarkable, hiding secrets that had survived a century and a half of forgetting. She made coffee using the ancient percolator she'd found in a cabinet grounds she'd bought at a discount store, water that ran rusty for 30 seconds before clearing. The coffee tasted metallic and bitter, but the caffeine hit her bloodstream like a promise of functionality. While Rosie still slept, Eva pulled out her phone and scrolled to Dr. Margaret Aldridge's number, her finger hovering over the call button. Margaret Aldridge had been more than Eva's professor during her master's program at the State University. She'd been a mentor, someone who understood that history wasn't just dates and dead people, but living tissue that connected past to present in ways most people preferred to ignore. After Nate died and Eva's life imploded, Margaret had called monthly offering help. Eva was too proud to accept advice Eva hadn't been ready to hear. Now Eva needed her expertise more than her sympathy. The phone rang 4 times before Margaret's voice came through sleep, roughened, and concerned. Eva. My God, it's been months. Are you all right? I found something. Eva kept her voice low, aware of Rosie stirring in the next room. Something big. I need your help. She spent 20 minutes describing the discovery, sending photos of the documents via text message as she talked. Margaret's silence grew heavier with each image that landed, the kind of quiet that comes from a professional realizing they're witnessing something that will reshape their field. When Eva finished, the pause stretched long enough that she thought the connection had dropped. Then Margaret's voice came back, shaking slightly. Eva, if this is authentic, and from what you're showing me it absolutely appears to be, this could be the find of the decade. The Fairmont Plantation Underground Railroad Station has been speculated about in academic circles for years, but no physical evidence had ever surfaced. Colonel Fairmont's journals never mentioned it. His wife's official papers were destroyed in Sherman's March, and the plantation house burned to foundations. Historians assumed any chambers or hiding places were lost. What do I do? First, secure the site. Don't let anyone else access that chamber until I can get there with proper documentation equipment. Margaret's professional authority had kicked in, the tone Eva remembered from seminars where graduate students learned the difference between curiosity and scholarship. I'm canceling my morning classes. Expect me by early afternoon. And Eva, this could change everything for you. Federal Historic Site designation comes with protections funding caretaker positions. This isn't just history. It's your future. After disconnecting, Eva stood at the window watching light strengthen over Willowbrook. Other trailers showed signs of waking smoke from chimneys, vehicles starting the mundane rituals of people going to jobs or staying home because jobs had dried up like everything else in rural Georgia. She felt disconnected from their normalcy, as if the chamber beneath her floor had pulled her into a different timeline where past and present occupied the same space. Rosie emerged from her blanket cocoon, eyes bright despite the early hour. Did you call someone about the secret room? I did, baby. A professor I used to study with. She's coming this afternoon to look at what we found. The morning passed in strange domesticity. Eva made breakfast from the supplies she'd brought, cereal with powdered milk toast from bread that was 2 days from stale. She helped Rosie with the morning routine that the wheelchair made, complicated bathroom transfers and medication doses, and the careful checking of pressure points that could turn into bed sores without vigilant attention. Through it all, Eva's mind kept returning to the chamber, to Catherine Fairmont's journal entries, to the child singing, while her whip marks were treated. Around 11 o'clock, a sharp knock at the door made Eva's pulse jump. Too early for Margaret. She checked the window and saw a black Escalade parked beside her sedan, mud-splattered but expensive, the kind of vehicle that announced its owner's tax bracket before they opened their mouth. The woman on the porch wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than Eva had earned in a month when she still had teaching income. 50s maybe, with hair styled in a way that required professional maintenance and jewelry that caught light like little declarations of wealth. Her smile was pleasant and utterly empty of warmth. Mrs. Hartwell, I'm Vivian Blackwood Sterling. I understand you've recently taken up residence here. Eva opened the door but didn't step aside to invite entry. Can I help you? I represent Sterling Development Corporation. We're in the process of acquiring properties in this area for a commercial development project. Vivian's eyes moved past Eva, cataloging the trailer's interior with an assessment that felt invasive. I wanted to introduce myself and make you an offer before you get too settled. The trailer's not for sale. Vivian's smile never wavered. Everything's for sale at the right price, Mrs. Hartwell. And given the condition of this particular unit, I'm prepared to be quite generous. $10,000 cash for relocation assistance. You could find much better accommodations for yourself and your daughter. The mention of Rosie sent ice through Eva's veins. Thank you, but we're not interested in moving. We just got here. Vivian pulled a business card from a silver case that probably cost more than Eva's car. The offer stands. When you realize the realities of maintaining a property like this, the repairs, the code violations, the costs, you'll remember, I was fair. She handed over the card. My personal number's on the back. Use it any time. After the Escalade pulled away, Eva stood holding the business card like it might bite her. Vivian Blackwood Sterling. The Blackwood part of that hyphenated name couldn't be coincidence. This woman knew something about the history beneath Eva's floor, had to know, because why else would a development corporation care about one decaying trailer in the poorest park in the county? Silas Thornton appeared before Eva could process the implications, his truck pulling up with the kind of rattle that suggested mechanical systems held together by habit rather than proper function. He climbed out slowly, moving like a man whose joints had logged too many miles. That woman give you trouble. She offered to buy the trailer. $10,000 to relocate. Silas spat into the mud, a gesture Eva suspected was his editorial comment on Vivian's offer. That woman's family name used to be Fairmont before her grandmother married money and changed it. Vivian Blackwood was born Vivian Fairmont, granddaughter of Colonel Joshua Fairmont's youngest son. She's been buying up properties along the old plantation boundaries for the last 5 years. What does she do with them? Makes them disappear. Buildings get demolished, records get lost, history gets paved over for shopping centers and parking lots. Silas leaned against his truck, his pale eyes studying Eva with an intensity that made her understand he'd been a soldier once trained to assess threats and opportunities. You found something in that trailer, didn't you? Something she wants erased. Eva made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. Yes. I found an underground railroad station, a chamber beneath the floor with documents from the 1860s, evidence that Catherine Fairmont helped enslaved people escape. Silas's face went very still. Catherine Fairmont, the colonel's wife, the woman who... His voice trailed off. Eva waited, watching emotions cross his weathered features, like weather systems, surprise recognition, something that might have been grief or might have been vindication. My grandfather Silas finally managed, his voice rough, was 9 years old when Catherine Fairmont hid him in a chamber beneath her husband's plantation house. Helped him and his sister escape north in 1863. He came back after the war, worked this land as a free man, bought 40 acres of it when it was sold off in lots. When I had the chance to buy this trailer park 30 years ago, I took it because I knew what ground I was standing on. Knew it was sacred, paid for with courage I couldn't begin to match. Do you have anything from that time? Any documentation? Silas reached into his truck and pulled out a wooden doll small enough to fit in a child's hand, carved with crude features that time had worn smooth. My grandfather made this for my mother. Said it was a copy of one his sister carried when they escaped the one she had to leave behind in the chamber because they could only take what they could hide under their clothes. He spent his whole life wishing he could go back and find it, give it to her, but she died before that chamber was ever found. Eva's breath caught. I found a wooden doll in the chamber. Small, old, hand-carved. Silas's eyes went wet. That's her doll, then. Sarah's doll. My great-aunt Sarah, who I never met, but whose story my grandfather told until the day he died. She made it to Canada but got sick the first winter. Never saw her 10th birthday. Before Eva could respond, another vehicle pulled up, a white van with the State University logo on the side. Margaret Aldridge climbed out, already reaching for equipment cases in the back, her movements energized by academic excitement barely contained. Behind her van, a sedan arrived carrying a man in National Park Service uniform. Eva Hartwell. Margaret strode forward with the confidence of someone who'd spent decades being the smartest person in most rooms. The man with her extended a hand. Agent Marcus Torres, National Park Service. Dr. Aldridge contacted me about a potential significant historical discovery. I'll need to see the site and determine if federal protection is warranted. The afternoon dissolved into controlled chaos. Margaret documented the chamber with professional precision photographs from multiple angles, measurements, careful examination of the documents that Eva had handled with bare hands the night before. Agent Torres inspected the structural integrity, tested the air quality, made notes in a tablet while firing questions. Ava answered with her teaching background, reasserting itself, pulling dates and context from memory she'd thought lost to grief and survival mode. Rosie watched from the trailer entrance, too excited to nap, her questions coming in bursts that Margaret answered with the patience of someone who remembered being a curious child herself. Silas stood guard outside his presence, feeling less like observation and more like protection, as if he'd assigned himself the role of keeping Vivian Blackwood Sterling from interfering. As evening approached, Margaret climbed from the chamber with her eyes bright behind her glasses. "Eva, this is extraordinary. The preservation is remarkable. Those oilcloth wrappings created a microenvironment that protected the documents from moisture and oxidation. Some of these letters are in better condition than papers I've seen in climate-controlled archives." She pulled out her tablet, scrolling through the photos she'd taken. "And the historical significance is beyond anything I'd imagined. Catherine Fairmont's journal entries alone would be major, but combined with the operational documents, the lists of people help the coordination with other stations. This is primary source material that will rewrite what we know about the Georgia Underground Railroad network." Agent Torres joined them, his expression carefully neutral in the way of people trained not to show excitement until official decisions were made. "Mrs. Hartwell, based on my preliminary assessment, I'm recommending immediate emergency protection under the National Historic Preservation Act. This site shows every indication of being eligible for National Historic Landmark status." He pulled out paperwork from his case. "That means federal oversight, protection from development or destruction, and funding for proper excavation and preservation." "What does that mean for us?" Eva's voice came out smaller than she intended. "For my daughter and me," Margaret's smile was genuine and warm. "It means you're about to become caretakers of a national treasure. Sites like this receive federal funding for preservation and management. There are grants, university research partnerships, educational programs. Eva, you'll need to hire people, coordinate with historians and archaeologists, manage public access. This is a job, a career, not just a discovery." Eva thought about Vivian's offer, $10,000 to disappear and let history be erased. She thought about Catherine Fairmont risking everything night after night for 247 strangers. She thought about Rosie watching from the doorway, learning what it meant to stand for something even when easier options existed. Some legacies are more important than money. Eva looked at Agent Torres. "What do we need to do?" The protection order was filed electronically before Margaret and Torres left federal authority, moving with a speed Eva hadn't known government could achieve. Before they drove away, Margaret pulled Eva aside. "There's something you should know. Vivian Blackwood Sterling has resources, lawyers, political connections, money to fight this if she wants. She'll likely claim family ownership or challenge the historical significance or find some angle to block federal designation. Be prepared for legal warfare." Eva watched their vehicles disappear down the muddy road as dusk settled over Willowbrook. Inside the trailer, she found Rosie asleep in her wheelchair, journal open on her lap, to a page where she'd written, "Mama found a secret that matters." The simple declaration hit Eva harder than Margaret's warnings. 2 days passed in relative quiet, the kind that felt like the pause before a storm, rather than actual peace. Eva spent hours in the chamber, carefully inventorying every object under Margaret's emailed guidance, photographing and documenting with meticulous care. Federal archaeologists were scheduled to arrive the following week, but Margaret had made clear that Eva's preliminary work would be invaluable, that her teaching background qualified her to participate in the research rather than just observe. Rosie had settled into their new home with the adaptability children possessed when given no alternative. She'd arranged her books on a shelf Eva had cleaned, hung drawings on walls that needed paint, claimed the couch as her territory. At night, she asked Eva to read from Catherine Fairmont's journal. The entries about children helped to freedom, becoming bedtime stories that taught courage in ways fairy tales never managed. The lawsuit arrived via courier on the third morning, thick envelope marked with the logo of Pemberton and Callaway attorneys at law. Eva opened it with hands that shook slightly, reading legal language that translated to a simple message: Vivian Blackwood Sterling was claiming ownership of the land beneath Trailer 17 based on family inheritance from the Fairmont estate. The claim argued that the chamber and its contents were part of the original plantation property, that Vivian, as direct descendant of Colonel Joshua Fairmont, held legal right to any historical discoveries made on land that had been Fairmont property before its division and sale. The lawsuit requested immediate injunction against federal protection, return of all artifacts to Fairmont family possession, and compensation for loss of family heritage. Eva called Margaret, who'd been expecting something like this. They're claiming ancestral ownership. It's a weak argument. The land was legally subdivided and sold after the war. Property rights passed through multiple owners, and there's no legal precedent for descendants claiming fines on property they haven't owned for over a century. But Vivian has expensive lawyers and political connections. She'll make this painful even if she loses eventually. That evening, a news van appeared at the park entrance, reporter and cameraman filming B-roll of Willowbrook, while Silas stood blocking their access to Trailer 17. The story had leaked, probably through someone at the university or the Park Service, Margaret suspected, and local media was running with the angle of struggling widow versus wealthy developer, David and Goliath, with historical artifacts as the prize. Eva watched the coverage on her phone, sitting with Rosie on the couch they shared as bed and living space. The reporter's voiceover described the discovery in dramatic terms, showed footage of the trailer from a distance, interviewed Margaret via phone about the historical significance. Then Vivian appeared on screen, professionally styled and perfectly sympathetic. My family's heritage is being stolen by someone who has no connection to this land, no understanding of the Fairmont family's complex history. Vivian's expression was practiced sorrow. While I sympathize with Mrs. Hartwell's difficult circumstances, justice requires that family artifacts remain with family. My ancestors' papers and possessions should be preserved by those who can honor them appropriately. The implication landed like a slap, that Eva, poor and desperate, couldn't be trusted with historical preservation, that wealth equaled competence, that Vivian's connection through blood mattered more than Catherine Fairmont's explicit rejection of everything her husband represented. Online comments on the news station's website were divided. Some supported Eva, as the underdog applauded her for choosing preservation over Vivian's likely buyout offers. Others called her selfish for not accepting what must have been generous compensation, suggested she was using a disabled daughter as emotional manipulation, questioned whether someone living in a trailer park was qualified to manage historical artifacts. Eva closed the browser before Rosie could see the cruelty strangers were capable of from behind anonymous screens. But the doubt crept in anyway, worming through her defenses. What if they were right? What if her stubbornness was harming Rosie rather than helping? The $10,000 Vivian had offered could cover Rosie's medications for months, could pay for the physical therapy sessions, insurance no longer covered, could buy stability instead of this precarious existence above secrets that might destroy them. Mama Rosie's voice cut through the spiral of second-guessing. Are we going to let that lady take the secret room? Eva looked at her daughter, 6 years old, and already learning that the world wasn't fair, that people with power used it in ways that crushed those without. No, baby. We're going to fight to protect it. Even if it's hard, especially because it's hard. The words came out with more certainty than Eva felt. Some things are worth fighting for even when you're scared. Rosie nodded, satisfied with this answer, in the way children were when adults spoke truth without condescension. Mrs. Catherine was scared, but she helped people anyway. Like Daddy was scared, but he went into the fire anyway. Maybe being scared and doing it anyway is what makes it brave. The next morning brought Vivian herself, stepping from her Escalade in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Eva's monthly grocery budget when she'd had a monthly grocery budget. But this time her approach was different, softer, more personal, as if they were friends rather than adversaries. Mrs. Hartwell, may I come in? Just to talk? No lawyers, no pressure. Against her better judgment, Eva stepped aside. Vivian entered the trailer, her eyes taking in the modest space with an expression Eva couldn't quite read. Pity maybe, or calculation disguised as sympathy. I want to be honest with you. Want to be. Vivian settled on the couch without asking her movements, practiced and smooth. "I've done research into your situation. I know your husband died 8 months ago saving others. I know you lost your teaching position in budget cuts. I know your daughter's medical needs are extensive and expensive." She paused, letting the knowledge of Eva's vulnerability sit between them like a weapon sheathed but visible. "I'm not heartless, Mrs. Hartwell. I'm a mother too. I understand choosing your child's well-being above everything else." Eva remained standing, unwilling to accept the false equality Vivian was offering. "What do you want?" "I want to make you a better offer. $100,000. Cash immediately available, no strings except you drop opposition to my family's ownership claim and vacate this property within 30 days. Vivian's voice stayed gentle, reasonable, as if she were doing Eva a favor rather than trying to erase evidence of her ancestors' crimes. "Think about what that money could do. Rosemary's medications covered for years, physical therapy, a real home in a safe neighborhood. Maybe even enough left over to finish your teaching degree, start over somewhere better than this." The offer hung in the air, tempting in ways Eva hadn't anticipated. $100,000. It was more money than Nate had made in 2 years as a firefighter. It was security, stability, a future that didn't involve rationing medication and washing clothes in sinks and watching her daughter adapt to poverty with grace that broke Eva's heart. But it was also erasure. Taking Vivian's money meant the chamber would become her property. The documents, her family's artifacts. The story of Catherine Fairmont's courage twisted into whatever narrative suited the Fairmont descendants. It meant Silas's grandfather's testimony would be dismissed. Sarah's wooden doll would disappear into private collection. The 247 souls helped to freedom would be reduced to footnotes in a story controlled by those who'd profited from their enslavement. No. The word came out firm, final. Those artifacts belong in museums. Those stories belong to everyone, and that chamber is sacred ground paid for by people who risked everything for freedom. It's not for sale. Not for 100,000, not for 1,000,000. Vivian's sympathetic mask slipped slightly. "You're making a mistake. I have lawyers who will tie this up in courts for years. I have judges who golf with my husband. I have political connections that can make federal protection disappear like smoke. You're a widow living in a trailer with a disabled child and no income. How long can you fight? As long as it takes." Eva moved to the door, opening it. "Get out." After the Escalade roared away, spraying mud like contempt, Eva stood on the small porch and let herself shake. The fear was real. The vulnerability Vivian had identified wasn't exaggeration. Eva was one crisis away from complete collapse, one medical emergency from having to choose between Rosie's health and keeping a roof over their heads. Fighting Vivian meant accepting that collapse might come faster, might come with legal consequences Eva couldn't afford. But surrender meant teaching Rosie that courage only mattered when it was convenient, that integrity had a price point, that some people's stories mattered less than others' comfort. Silas approached from his office, moving with purpose. "She threatened you, offered me 100,000 to walk away and let her take ownership. You turn her down." Eva nodded. "Good." Silas pulled a folder from under his arm. "Because I've been doing some research of my own. That woman's family has been buying and demolishing historic properties across 3 counties. Managed to erase 2 documented Underground Railroad sites by claiming family ownership and then destroying the evidence before federal protection could kick in. She's systematic about it, uses shell corporations and legal technicalities and political pressure. She's gotten away with it because she's rich and connected, and most people don't have the resources to fight back. Why is she so determined to erase this history?" Silas's expression went hard. "Shame, maybe, or protecting family reputation. The Fairmont name used to mean something in Georgia society: wealth, tradition, old money, respectability. Hard to maintain that respectability when evidence surfaces that the family fortune was built on slavery and that the colonel's own wife betrayed him to help his property escape. Easier to make the evidence disappear than confront what it means." That week crawled past with the quality of waiting for verdict in a trial where Eva didn't fully understand the charges. Margaret called daily with updates on the legal maneuvering, Vivian's lawyers filing injunctions, federal attorneys countering with protection orders, judges scheduling hearings and then postponing them based on motions Eva couldn't follow. The media coverage intensified, national news picking up the story. Talking heads debating property rights versus historical preservation, while footage of Willowbrook played in the background like proof of Eva's unworthiness. Rosie started having nightmares, waking tangled in blankets and crying for Nate, confused about where they were and why everything kept changing. Eva held her daughter through the panicked moments, whispering reassurances she wasn't sure she believed, promising stability she couldn't guarantee. The stress manifested physically. Rosie's appetite vanished. Her medication seemed less effective. Her energy levels dropped to the point where getting from wheelchair to bathroom exhausted her. Eva made an appointment with Rosie's doctor, using the last of her emergency cash to cover the copay they couldn't actually afford. The doctor's concern was visible. Mrs. Hartwell, Rosemary's vitals are declining. Blood pressure elevated, signs of stress-related inflammation. She needs stability, reduced anxiety, consistent care. Is everything all right at home? The question landed like accusation disguised as concern. Was everything all right? They were living in a trailer with soft floors above a chamber that had become the center of a legal battle, subsisting on canned goods and the charity of a landlord who charged $300 because he knew it was all Eva had, fighting a woman with infinite resources and no apparent conscience. Nothing was all right, but admitting that meant risking intervention. Eva couldn't afford social services, asking questions about adequacy of housing, medical professionals, deciding Rosie needed more than Eva could provide. "We're managing." Eva forced confidence into her voice. "Just adjusting to a new place, new routines. It'll settle down." But it didn't settle. 2 weeks after refusing Vivian's offer, Eva woke to find Rosie burning with fever, her breathing labored and wet-sounding. The hospital was 40 minutes away, and Eva's car coughed ominously before starting, but terror was excellent motivation. She drove with Rosie wrapped in blankets, her daughter's forehead hot enough to scare her, whispering prayers to Nate and God and anyone who might be listening. "Pneumonia," the emergency room doctor said after x-rays and blood work. "Brought on by stress and weakened immune system. She'll need IV antibiotics, monitoring at least 3 days inpatient." "I don't have insurance." Eva's voice cracked on the admission. "We lost it when I lost my job. I can pay something, but not." The doctor's expression softened. "We'll work it out. Right now your daughter needs treatment. Worry about billing later." While Rosie slept in a hospital bed, IV dripping antibiotics into her small arm, Eva sat in the chair beside her and felt the weight of every choice she'd made since finding that chamber. If she'd taken Vivian's first offer, $10,000, they'd be in an apartment somewhere with heat and running water that didn't rust. If she'd accepted the $100,000, Rosie would have health insurance, a pediatrician on call, stability that didn't involve sleeping on a stranger's couch in rooms that smelled like mildew and defeat. Margaret found her there on the second day, having driven from the university, when Eva didn't answer phone calls. She took one look at Eva's face and pulled up another chair. "This isn't your fault. She got sick because we're living in a place that isn't fit for a child with health problems. Because I chose dead people's stories over my living daughter's well-being." Eva's voice was flat, exhausted. "Vivian was right. I'm selfish." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, watching Rosie breathe with the assistance of oxygen they couldn't afford. Then she pulled out her tablet. "Eva, I need to show you something. Federal funding came through this morning. Full protection approved, emergency grant released. $80,000 immediately available for site preservation and caretaker salary." She scrolled to another document. "And the university wants to hire you, full-time position coordinating research on the Fairmont site, teaching 2 courses on Georgia history benefits, including family health coverage, starting immediately." Eva stared at the screen, the words not processing. "What you didn't choose history over Rosemary. You chose to teach her that some principles are worth defending even when it costs everything." Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. "Catherine Fairmont made that choice 247 times. Your husband made it running into a burning building. You made it refusing to let someone erase evidence of courage that deserves to be remembered. That's not selfishness. That's integrity. But Rosie will recover, will have health insurance, will grow up knowing her mother stood for something when it mattered. Margaret closed the tablet. The legal battle isn't over. Vivian will keep fighting. But federal protection is in place now, funding is secured, and you have resources she can't easily counter. You won that round, Eva. You and Rosemary both won. 3 days later, Rosie was discharged with prescriptions Eva could now afford, and a follow-up appointment covered by the university's health plan. Driving back to Willowbrook felt different somehow, the trailer park less like defeat and more like temporary headquarters in a longer campaign. The chamber beneath Trailer 17 was no longer just their secret. It was a federally protected site destination for archaeologists arriving next week, subject of research proposals from universities across the country. Silas met them at the trailer with news. Judge ruled against Vivian's ownership claim. Federal protection stands. She can still appeal, but it'll take years and probably won't succeed. Eva helped Rosie from the car, settling her in the wheelchair with practiced movements. What happens now? Now you become the guardian of history everybody wants access to. Silas grinned, the expression making him look decades younger. And Vivian Blackwood Sterling learns that money can't always win against people who care more about truth than comfort. That night after Rosie was asleep, Eva sat at the small kitchen table where bills used to pile and despair used to live. Now federal documents and research proposals covered the surface evidence that desperation had transformed into purpose. She pulled out a notebook, not Catherine's journals but her own, started that first week to document everything in case Vivian's lawyers found ways to make truth disappear. The entry for today was simple. Rosie came home. Federal protection stands. We won this round. But beneath it she added, Vivian will appeal. This isn't over. Fighting continues tomorrow. She closed the notebook, checked Rosie's breathing one more time, and lay down on the couch that was becoming less necessity and more choice. Outside, the October night settled over Willowbrook with the weight of history that refused to stay buried. Inside, two people who'd had nowhere else to go had found something worth staying for. The weeks after Rosie's discharge blurred into months of careful reconstruction. Federal archaeologists arrived with equipment that transformed Willowbrook into academic field site. Eva learned to coordinate excavations while Rosie attended physical therapy funded by university health insurance that felt like science fiction after months of rationing medications. Vivian's appeals moved through courts with the speed of bureaucracy designed to exhaust rather than resolve, but federal protection held money flowed, and gradually the panic of survival gave way to the steadier work of building something permanent. By the time October returned, bringing anniversary of their arrival and cool air that smelled like possibility, Willowbrook had become unrecognizable from the desperate refuge Eva had rented with her last $300. 12 months transformed Willowbrook from forgotten way station into pilgrimage site, where rust-eaten trailers had squatted in defeat. Heritage gardens now bloomed with cotton and tobacco and vegetables that would have grown in the 1860s. Educational placards explaining their significance to visitors who arrived by the busload. The original structures remained but renovated. One housed administrative offices where Eva coordinated research requests, another served as archive space for the documents Margaret's team had cataloged and digitized. A third functioned as classroom, where Rosie gave presentations to school groups who hung on every word from a 7-year-old who understood that history wasn't dates but decisions. Eva stood on the newly constructed observation deck attached to Trailer 17, watching the October afternoon sun paint everything gold. The dedication ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock. 500 guests, confirmed media trucks already positioning for optimal coverage angles. Governor's office had sent advanced security. Senators were flying in. The Smithsonian had dispatched a representative to discuss permanent exhibition space for select artifacts. But it was the people gathered near the entrance who mattered most to Eva locals, who'd driven from surrounding counties, descendants of families who'd passed through Georgia on their journey north, historians who'd spent careers studying fragments of what Eva had found intact. Silas moved among them with the ease of someone who'd earned his place through blood connection rather than academic credentials, sharing stories about his grandfather while visitors listened with the reverence usually reserved for eyewitness testimony. The Freedom Bell hung in a pavilion constructed from reclaimed wood and modern steel, its bronze surface already marked with handprints of early visitors who'd rung it for their own journeys toward liberation. Rosie had designed it during those first terrifying weeks when Eva fought Vivian in courts, and Rosie fought pneumonia in hospitals, her sketch showing hands of different colors reaching upward around the bell's circumference. A metal worker in Atlanta had taken the concept and created something that managed to be both memorial and call to action. Margaret appeared at Eva's elbow, tablet in hand, as always, her professorial intensity softened by satisfaction that came from witnessing theoretical knowledge become tangible impact. The network crews want you for interviews before the ceremony. Governor's people are asking about photo opportunities. And there's someone at the security checkpoint who claims to be descendant of one of the people helped through the station. Eva's pulse jumped. We've had a dozen such claims in the past month, most well-intentioned but historically unfounded. This one brought documentation: birth certificates, family Bible, a diary fragment. Margaret's expression suggested she'd already verified authenticity. Eva. She's descended from Abigail Grace. The 7-year-old Catherine Fairmont wrote about the one who arrived alone with whip marks. The world tilted slightly. Abigail Grace had haunted Eva's thoughts for months. That entry in Catherine's journal about a child singing her mother's lullaby while being treated for wounds no child should survive. They'd found no record of what became of her after 1863, whether she'd made it north or been captured, or simply disappeared into the gaps where historical records failed to document individual lives among thousands fleeing enslavement. Where is she? Security holding area. Wanted clearance before bringing her through. Bring her to the chamber. Eva made the decision without hesitation. Before the ceremony, before the crowds, before this, becomes performance instead of connection. The woman waiting near the trailer entrance was early 30s, carrying an infant against her chest, in a wrap that looked expensive and organic and carefully researched. Her face held features Eva recognized from somewhere she couldn't immediately place, then realized the composite sketch an artist had created based on Catherine's descriptions, commissioned by a magazine doing a feature on the discovery. The resemblance wasn't exact, but unmistakable, something in the eyes and cheekbones that suggested genetics remembered even when names got lost. Mrs. Hartwell. Her voice carried educated precision, overlaying southern vowels she hadn't quite shed, despite whatever northern university had shaped her diction. I'm Hannah Richardson. My great-great-great-grandmother was Abigail Grace. When I heard about this place, about what you found..." Her throat worked against emotion. "We had to come. Had to say thank you to someone, even if Catherine Fairmont's been dead 160 years. Eva found herself embracing this stranger. This woman whose existence proved that terror and courage and a 7-year-old's resilience had resulted in life continuing forward across generations. "Tell me about her." "About Abigail." Hannah pulled a worn leather journal from her bag, smaller than the ones Eva had found in the chamber, but clearly from the same era. She made it to Canada with a Quaker family who posed as her employers. Got sick that first winter, pneumonia almost killed her, but survived and learned to read in their household. After the war ended, she came back south to Chicago, not Georgia, and became a teacher. Taught for 40 years in schools for freedmen's children. Had 6 children of her own, 19 grandchildren. She pulled photographs from the journal's pages. Daguerreotypes showing a woman in her 60s surrounded by family, her face lined, but her posture suggesting someone who'd learned early that survival required strength. Did she ever speak about Catherine Fairmont? Hannah's smile was complicated. She wrote about her. Called her the lady with storm eyes and gentle hands. Said Catherine gave her cornbread and told her brave girls changed the world. She opened the journal to a page marked with ribbon. This is from when Abigail was maybe 15, already teaching younger children in the household where she worked. I think of that night often. The darkness of the chamber, the smell of earth and fear, Mrs. Catherine's whispers promising I would be free. I was so scared I couldn't breathe, but she said fear was the price of freedom, and I had already paid it by walking 20 miles alone through swamps. Now I teach other children who are scared, and I tell them what she told me. Courage isn't not being afraid. Courage is deciding that what you're afraid for matters less than what you're afraid of losing. Eva felt tears tracking down her face unchecked. Rosie needs to hear this. She wheeled herself down the observation deck ramp, navigating with the increased confidence that came from a year of physical therapy the university health insurance had covered. "Rosie, this is Hannah Richardson. Her great-great-great-grandmother hid in our chamber." Rosie's eyes went wide. "Abigail Grace, the one who sang while Mrs. Catherine helped her." Hannah nodded, clearly unprepared for a 7-year-old's immediate grasp of historical connection. "That's right. And this is my daughter Catherine, named for the woman who saved my ancestor's life." The baby gurgled, tiny fist escaping the wrap to wave at nothing. Eva felt something shift in her chest, some recognition that history wasn't linear, but circular, that courage passed forward through generations in ways that couldn't be measured in gold coins or federal grants. "Can I hold her?" Hannah unwrapped the baby with practiced movements, settling the small, warm weight into Eva's arms. Catherine stared up with the unfocused intensity infants brought to examining faces, her skin several shades darker than Eva's, but her humanity identical in ways that should have been obvious to Colonel Fairmont and every man who'd defended the system he represented. Rosie reached out tentatively. "Can I?" Eva settled baby Catherine carefully into her daughter's lap, watching Rosie's face transform with wonder and responsibility. The moment felt enormous. Somehow, this child whose wheelchair was descendant of trauma, holding a child whose existence proved that trauma could be survived and transcended. Someone was photographing them, Margaret documenting everything with scholarly precision, but Eva didn't care about optics or publicity. This was real. This was what mattered. This was why she'd refused Vivian's offers and fought through legal battles and sat beside hospital beds praying her daughter would survive to see justice done. "Would you like to see the chamber?" Eva heard herself asking. "Before the ceremony. Before it becomes public spectacle." Hannah's breath caught. More than anything. They descended together, Eva, Hannah, Rosie, maneuvering the steps carefully with assistance baby Catherine carried by her mother. The chamber had been stabilized, structurally lighting installed that illuminated without damaging, but the essential nature remained unchanged. Brick walls that had witnessed terror and hope. Shelves that had held supplies for people risking everything. Dirt floor where 247 souls had waited for darkness, and signals that meant they could continue north. Hannah stood in the center, turning slowly, her free hand trailing along brick. "My ancestor hid here." Stood where I'm standing, terrified and brave simultaneously. She was 7 years old, same age as Rosie, and she had survived things no child should have to survive, and she made it through this chamber to freedom and a life she built from nothing. Eva pointed to a corner where a small handprint was still visible in the mortar, preserved by accident or intention. "We think this might be hers. The size matches children her age." Hannah moved to the handprint, placing her own hand beside it. 5 fingers separated by 160 years pressed into mortar that had held its shape through wars and peace and the slow erosion of time trying to erase evidence of courage. She was real. Not just a story or an ancestor's name in a Bible, but a real child who touched this wall and left proof she existed. Rosie's voice carried from where she sat on the steps, baby Catherine gurgling contentedly in her arms. Mrs. Catherine wrote that Abigail sang while being helped. "Do you know what song?" Hannah's voice broke slightly. "Wade in the Water." Abigail taught it to her own children, who taught it to theirs, who taught it to mine. My mother sang it as lullaby, even though she didn't know why it mattered, just that it had been passed down through generations of women who understood that some songs carry more than melody. She began singing, voice untrained but true, the spiritual filling the chamber with sound that felt less like performance and more like prayer. Eva felt the hair on her arms rise, felt Nate's presence somehow as if he was standing just beyond her peripheral vision. Felt Catherine Fairmont's spirit in the brick and mortar and dirt. The song had been code, once instructions for escaping slaves to use water to hide their scent from dogs. Now it was memorial and continuation, both proof that what had begun in terror had survived into joy. The dedication ceremony proceeded with the smooth precision of events planned by people who understood symbolism and public relations. The governor spoke about Georgia's complicated history and the importance of confronting difficult truths. Margaret presented academic context that made the discovery understandable without diminishing its emotional impact. Agent Torres explained federal protection in terms that emphasized permanence and commitment. But when Eva took the podium notes she'd prepared carefully the night before, suddenly felt inadequate. 500 people watched cameras broadcasting to audiences she'd never meet, and none of it mattered as much as the truths that demanded telling. A year ago I had $300 and thought my life was finished. She heard her voice amplify through speakers carrying across the assembled crowd. I was looking for shelter and found purpose instead. My daughter and I came here because we had nowhere else to go, and we discovered something that changed what we understood about survival and sacrifice and what it means to stand for principles when standing costs everything. She looked at Rosie sitting in the front row, baby Catherine asleep in her lap, Hannah beside them both. These chambers taught me that courage isn't complicated. It's just choosing to do what matters, even when what matters is terrifying and expensive and likely to destroy you. Catherine Fairmont made that choice 247 times over 4 years. Every person who hid in these chambers made that choice. My husband made that choice running into a burning building, and when I found this place I had to make that choice too. Vivian Blackwood Sterling sat in the audience, Eva noticed with surprise. Not in the front rows reserved for dignitaries, but toward the back, her expensive clothes and perfect styling making her visible even in a crowd. Their eyes met across the distance, and Eva saw something in Vivian's expression that looked less like hostility and more like something broken. This sight isn't just history. Eva continued, forcing her attention back to her prepared remarks. It's a reminder that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they choose conscience over comfort, when they decide that some legacies matter more than wealth or safety or the approval of people who profit from injustice. Catherine Fairmont was ordinary, a plantation mistress with children and social obligations, and every reason to remain silent while evil happened around her. But she chose to be extraordinary instead, and that choice saved lives and created futures, and gave us this tangible proof that resistance is always possible. The applause when Eva finished felt less like approval and more like relief, as if the audience had been holding collective breath, waiting to see if she would manage to articulate something they felt but couldn't express. The ribbon cutting proceeded with ceremonial scissors and photographs. The freedom bell rang for the first time officially, with Rosie pulling the rope and dedicating the sound to her father and Catherine Fairmont, and everyone still looking for freedom in whatever forms it took. Then Vivian approached, moving through the crowd with determination that made security tense until Eva waved them off. Up close, she looked older than she had a year ago, as if the legal battles had extracted costs beyond money and political capital. "Mrs. Hartwell, may I speak with you privately?" They walked away from the crowd toward the pine forest that edged the property's security, following at discreet distance. Vivian's composure seemed more fragile than Eva remembered, cracks showing through the polish. "I spent this year researching my family with the kind of honesty I'd avoided my entire life." Vivian's voice was steady but quiet, meant only for Eva. "Found letters Joshua Fairmont wrote that his descendants had hidden away because they revealed things we preferred not to know. He knew what Catherine was doing. Beat her when he discovered fugitives in the chamber. Threatened to kill her if she continued. She stayed anyway, kept helping anyway, accepted the violence because she believed freedom mattered more than her safety, or her marriage, or the social position she'd lose if the truth emerged publicly." Eva remained silent, letting Vivian work through whatever confession she'd come to make. "I'm descended from a man who profited from human suffering, and from a woman who sacrificed everything to alleviate it." Vivian's hands twisted together, manicured nails catching sunlight. "My whole life I defended the Fairmont name, built my identity around old money respectability, used family legacy to justify my position. But that legacy is built on blood and cruelty, and the only honorable Fairmont was the one who betrayed everything the name stood for. Why are you telling me this?" because I was wrong." Vivian met Eva's eyes directly. Wrong about ownership, wrong about heritage, wrong about what mattered. I tried to erase this place because confronting it meant confronting that my wealth, my status, my entire life exists because my ancestor enslaved human beings and his wife had to become a criminal to be decent. She pulled an envelope from her bag. "This is a cashier's check for $50 million. Endowment for the Catherine Fairmont Freedom Center. Unrestricted funding for education and preservation and research. No strings, no naming rights, anonymous if you prefer." Eva stared at the envelope, not taking it. "Why now?" "Because some debts can't be paid but still demand acknowledgement." Vivian's composure finally cracked, tears tracking through expensive makeup. "Because my daughter asked me what I'm teaching her about right and wrong, and I realized I was teaching her that money matters more than truth. Because Catherine Fairmont chose to honor humanity over loyalty to evil, and I want to make the same choice even if I'm 160 years late." Eva took the envelope, feeling its weight. "This doesn't erase what you tried to do. I know, but maybe it helps protect what you're trying to build." Vivian stepped back, preparing to leave. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Hartwell, you were right to fight me. Right to choose principle over the money I offered. Some legacies are worth protecting even when protecting them costs everything." After Vivian disappeared back into the crowd, Eva stood holding the check and trying to process transformation she hadn't anticipated. Redemption was possible apparently even for people who'd weaponized wealth against truth. Catherine Fairmont had believed that had continued helping even people who'd previously supported slavery if they were willing to change. Maybe forgiveness was its own form of courage, harder than fighting, because it required believing people could become better than their worst choices. The afternoon dissolved into reception and interviews and the administrative work of managing an event where nothing went disastrously wrong, but 100 small issues required immediate attention. By evening, Eva was exhausted, her voice rough from hours of speaking, her feet aching from standing in shoes she'd bought specifically for this occasion and would probably never wear again. She found Rosie in the education center showing a group of teenagers the wooden doll Silas's grandfather had carved. "This is Sarah's doll, the one she had to leave behind when she escaped because she could only carry what fit under her clothes. Her brother came back after the war and spent his whole life wishing he could find it. And now it's here with the original because Mrs. Hartwell found the chamber and protected it even when people with money and power tried to make her stop." The teenagers listened with the half-embarrassed attention young people brought to history when it was made relevant to struggles they recognized. One girl raised her hand. "Why did your mom risk everything for old stuff?" Rosie considered the question with 7-year-old seriousness. "Because the stuff isn't what matters. What matters is the people who used it and what they did and what it teaches us about being brave. When being brave is hard. My daddy was brave running into fire. Mrs. Catherine was brave helping people escape. My mama was brave saying no to someone who wanted to erase that bravery." After the crowds dispersed and the cleanup crews finished and the security teams packed equipment, a vehicle approached as dusk settled, headlights cutting through the October evening. 3 women emerged, their movements suggesting exhaustion and desperation Eva recognized from her own reflection a year ago. The oldest hesitated before climbing the observation deck steps, her face carrying that particular wariness people developed when asking for help they weren't sure they deserved. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm sorry to come so late. We heard about what you did, how you found history and protected it, and—" She stopped, gathering courage. "We're facing eviction from Pine Grove Trailer Park 2 counties over. Developer wants the land for condos. But the park sits on old plantation property and my grandson found bricks in the creek bed that look like the ones in your photos. We thought maybe if there was something there like what you found, maybe we could—" Eva studied the 3 women illuminated by porch light, seeing herself a year ago, seeing every person who'd ever stood at the edge with nowhere left to fall. She thought about Catherine Fairmont's message from that quilt square about fear being the price, but courage being the currency, about paying it forward. "Yes." The word came out firm, final. "We'll help you. If there's history buried under your trailer park, we'll find it and protect it together." Rosie wheeled forward, her face bright with purpose. "We can be the helpers now like Mrs. Catherine was." Over the next hour, Eva made calls, Margaret promising to assemble a preliminary survey team, Agent Torres agreeing to fast-track federal assessment if initial findings warranted Silas offering his truck and his labor for whatever physical work was needed. The machinery she'd learned to operate over 12 months of fighting and building activated smoothly, resources and expertise mobilized by nothing more than the understanding that some fights were worth having and some legacies deserved protection. After the women left with promises and plans, and the first hope Eva suspected they'd felt in months, she stood on the observation deck watching stars emerge in the October sky. The trailer below had been transformed almost beyond recognition. Structurally reinforced systems, upgraded interior, renovated into actual livable space with heat and working appliances and a bathroom designed for wheelchair accessibility. But it was still fundamentally the same structure where Eva had spent her last $300 on first month's rent, where she'd broken through rotted floor and found history waiting. Inside, Rosie was already asleep in her actual bed in her actual room, with walls that didn't leak and heat that worked and a future that extended beyond next month's crisis. The university position paid enough that Eva could breathe without counting pennies. The federal grants covered site maintenance and expansion. Vivian's endowment meant programming and education and the capacity to help other communities find their own hidden histories. But the real wealth wasn't financial. It was purpose. It was waking up knowing the work mattered, that the stories she protected deserved protection, that the courage she honored had earned honoring. It was Rosie learning that principles had prices, but some principles were worth paying for. Eva returned inside and settled at the kitchen table, pulling out the journal she'd started keeping in deliberate echo of Catherine's. The entries documented not just the site's development, but her own transformation from desperate widow to guardian of history that refused to stay silent. "Dear Nate," she wrote in the careful script that still felt like conversation even though he'd been dead 14 months. "We made it. Not just survived, but found something worth surviving for. Rosie is thriving, healthy, happy. I'm teaching again, though the classroom is a chamber you'd have loved, and the students are anyone willing to listen." She paused, thinking about the parallels that had brought her here. Nate choosing to save strangers, Catherine choosing to betray her husband for people she'd been taught to see as property, 247 individuals choosing uncertain freedom over certain bondage. Each had made the choice that mattered more than safety. Your sacrifice taught us that love means protecting others even when protecting them costs everything. We're carrying that forward, baby. Every day, every choice, every moment we stand for something because you showed us how. The words blurred as Eva's eyes filled, but she kept writing because some things needed documentation, needed witness, needed to be recorded, so future generations would understand how individual choices accumulated into collective courage. She wrote about Hannah Richardson and baby Catherine, about Vivian's redemption, about the new families she'd help tomorrow and the next day and all the days that followed. She wrote until her hand cramped and the stars wheeled overhead and the October night deepened toward that quiet hour before dawn. Then she closed the journal, checked Rosie one final time and lay down in the bed she could actually afford now in the home she'd bought with her last $300 and protected with everything she had left. History had chosen her to be its guardian. She'd accepted that choice and all its consequences. And tomorrow, when new challenges arrived and old battles continued, she'd keep choosing courage because courage was the only currency that mattered, the only legacy worth leaving, the only way to honor everyone who'd ever hidden in chambers beneath the feet of those who claimed to own them. The railroad runs on, Eva thought, as sleep finally claimed her. Through hearts willing to risk everything for freedom, through stories that refused to stay silent, through ordinary people doing extraordinary things when circumstances demand it. All it takes is one person saying, "This way you're safe here, I'll help," and meaning it enough to pay whatever price that promise extracts. Outside, the Freedom Bell stood ready for tomorrow's visitors. Below, chambers held centuries of courage waiting to teach anyone willing to listen. And in this small, renovated trailer that had cost her last $300 and given her everything that mattered, Eva Hartwell, widow, mother, guardian, slept with the peace that came from knowing she'd chosen right, even when right had been impossibly hard.